Hello, I'm Courtney.
Hi, I'm Dana.
We're the Egg Sisters, and this is part 2 of our How to Make a Headdress tutorial with Dremel.
In this part of the tutorial, we're going to go over how to attach all of our elements to make an actual headdress, as well as how to make some embellishments using Worbla. Hope you like it. For the headdress, we wanted to add some bird skulls. To make them lightweight, we're going to sculpt them out of clay, and then we will heat up Worbla and put them over the clay sculpt to make a hollow mold. The clay that we're using is a water-based clay. We chose water-based clay because if we used an oil-based clay, when we added the hot Worbla, it would melt it. As reference, we had already sculpted a skull in oil-based clay, so we're just using that as our reference to recreate it in the water-based clay. With our Worbla skull, we won't need to get as much detail as we have in our reference model. We just need the basic shapes because the Worbla will only capture so much detail. You can use sculpting tools or just your fingers. Popsicle stick works nice just to get the basic shapes. Along with our main bird skull that's going to go in the middle of the headdress, we are going to add 2 smaller ones on the side, so we'll recreate the same design in a smaller skull that we'll just cast twice with the Worbla. Once we have our skulls sculpted, next will be to heat up some Worbla and recreate the shape. We're using the black Worbla because it is a little bit thinner than the traditional brown Worbla, so it will be easier to mold around our skulls. We put a piece of parchment paper down on our workspace to prevent the heated Worbla from sticking to our table, and then took a heat gun and then evenly heated both sides until it became malleable. You will be touching the Worbla with your hands and pressing it around the mold, so you may want to use heat protective gloves. Using your fingertips, pressing the Worbla down around the skull, you may need to reheat the Worbla as you go to keep forming it into tighter spaces. It's okay if the Worbla ends up folding on itself, just press the folds together. You'll be able to touch that up later when we start adding details. And if you want to further refine the details, you can use sculpting tools and further push some of the details. We dipped it in water to prevent the plastic sculpting tool from sticking to the warm plastic Worbla.
Once the Worbla has cooled around your sculpt, you can trim the flashing of Worbla around the edges, start loosening up the sides, and use your fingers or like a popsicle stick or whatever you got laying around and pull out the wet clay, leaving you with a hollow skull to start on the next step. Now that we have our hollow Worbla skull bases, we can mix 2-part epoxy and add more minute details to the skulls. If we had done this in the sculpting process, all this detail would have been lost because the Worbla was not able to capture something that small. So it's best to get your basic shape first and then use Apoxie Sculpt to add the finer details, which you can smooth out with water, sculpt with sculpting tools, you can sand it, you can Dremel it, you can do a lot of fine tuning to get it to be exactly the way you'd like it to look. So after you mix the 2 parts together really well, so they're super mixed, you can take little balls and just start smearing it on your sculpt. And then you can take water and kind of work it in, blend it in with the Worbla, and get the exaggerated pieces you'd like to make. So for one of them, we were having fun like with higher cheekbones, kind of working the nose a little bit better. We end up scraping in some texture on the beak, maybe smoothing out the skull in some places as well. Once the Apoxie Sculpt has fully cured after 24 hours, you can take a Dremel tool and clean up the edges, add more texture, and do all the last fine tuning for your piece.
When cleaning up the skulls with the Dremel, we used a small sanding barrel just to smooth out the edges and clean up the transition between the epoxy and the Worbla. And then to clean out the eye holes, which it's a smaller area, we used one of the carving bits that fit in there and was able to clean out the eye sockets.
Once we were done Dremeling the skulls, we sprayed it with a few coats of black primer paint to give us a clean base. Then we took some gold rub and buff that you can just take a little dab of, smear it around. You'll find that like if you press too hard, you're gonna fill in all the crevasses with the gold, and you want that to stay black to kind of show up. So really just gently rubbing your finger over the piece, it's gonna highlight all of the highest points of your detail and give a cool antique gold look.
For the next step is to make the Worbla base for all our components to be attached on. For this step, we are going to use the brown original Worbla. It is a little bit stronger and tear resistant than the black Worbla. And because it's going to be underneath everything, it doesn't really matter what color it is. The base is going to be constructed of just strips of the Worbla. So we just made 1-inch strips, doesn't have to be exact, of the brown Worbla. Just marking it with a Sharpie, and then we'll cut it with a pair of heavy-duty scissors. We took one of our cloth-covered mannequin heads or wig heads and covered it with saran wrap. That will be our base for putting the Worbla on. The plastic will prevent the Worbla from sticking to the fabric on the head. Once we have the strips cut out, then we gently heat both sides with the heat gun till it becomes malleable. And then working one strip at a time, we're gonna just create a reinforced base for the headdress. We went over the top first, that will run over the top of the head. Then we'll work around the base of the head, and then we'll add some more support strips in between. Once assembled, you may want to reheat some of the joints to make sure they're sticking appropriately, and then take the base off, try it on your head, and then just adjust and trim so you have a comfortable spot for your ears.
Once you have your Worbla base ready to go, you can start using ample amounts of hot glue to glue the foam horns directly onto the strips of Worbla. Our first mistake in this first horn is that we didn't Dremel away some of the acrylic paint, and it just wouldn't adhere to the Worbla. So we recommend figuring out where you want to glue the horn down, dremeling away the paint, and then you'll have a good connection point between the foam, the hot glue, and the Worbla.
For one of the elements of our headdress, we wanted to add a mohawk down the center. So what we did was take a white wig that we had, and we just wanted the center strip of hair out of it. So carefully with a utility blade and scissors, we went along and just cut each weft of hair along the seam line, deconstructing the sides of the wig from the center strip that we wanted. This left us with a single strip of fluffy white hair that will go down the center of our headdress.
Dana had this old Renaissance fair, of course, the bloody old skirt that you have in the closet just laying around that no one uses anymore. So we took that. It was the perfect colors that kind of matched the muted tones that we have going with this white mohawk and these horn colors. So we ripped them up. We cut this skirt into lots of strips and ripped them apart. So we had these nice raggedy, bloody, splotchy fabric strips to work with.
Once we had cut the entire skirt into a bunch of strips, we wanted to add some extra texture. So we took some of the strips and braided them so we could add those into the headdress as well. To attach all of the fabric, again, we just busted out the hot glue gun, and we needed to get the hot glue onto the Worbla without burning our fingers. So we grabbed some bamboo chopsticks, and we would put the glue on the fabric and then use the chopstick to push it down to get it towards the front underneath the horns. And we just continued in rows from the front to the back, adding the strips. After we added the strips, it was time to add the mohawk. Same technique, just adding hot glue onto the Worbla and then pressing the strip of wig down onto it. To add some more finishing to the front, we took the braided pieces to cover up the the previously glued strips and create a more interesting texture between the horns. And then same technique, using the hot glue, pressing it down with the chopsticks to prevent us from getting burnt. Adding a dab of hot glue and then pressing down with the chopstick until it cooled.
Lastly, we had these Worbla bird skulls to add. We put one in the center and one in front of each ear. On the front skull, there was paint on the horns where we were gonna connect the skull. So we dremeled away a little bit of that, so we had a nice contact point for the Worbla and the foam again. And there you have a homemade custom headdress. We hope you guys learned a lot from this video and can apply it to future costume projects.